Welcome, everyone. So today we'll be discussing lessons from Google's Agentforce journey. First of all, thank you for being here. We know this is lunchtime. We really appreciate you being here. There are a lot of sessions going on, so we appreciate that you guys are here. So my name is Hassan, and I'm here with my partner in crime, Venki, and we'll talk a little bit about who we are to start off with, and then afterwards we'll get into the lessons that we have learned. So we are part of Salesforce Hub at Google, and the mandate of Salesforce Hub, it was essentially created to define and deliver services and maximize Google's Salesforce investment. So that was like kind of our primary mandate. It still is. And essentially the way we do it is by focusing on three key pillars. The first one is faster time to market. And the way we do this is by providing, Salesforce at Google expertise across Google. We also run fully managed services for our PAs, product areas, or our customers. And then we also build a lot of reusable and pre-configured components that can be rolled out at scale at Google. The other thing we focus on is reducing enterprise risk overall. So this can be rolling out a standards and policy frameworks across Google, security and privacy best practices, and automated tooling to monitor whether the security and privacy risks are being met or not. And then also focusing on developer operations, security operation best practices, and just community collaboration throughout Google. The third pillar is lower cost of ownership, as a part of our mandate. And we do this kind of like what I've talked about previously, which is building reusable components, providing a shared pool of resources, and providing best practices for development and, just sharing it across Google. Recently, we were given a new mandate, and the mandate was that, we have to accelerate and enable this agentic era by bringing power of Gemini and Agentforce together. So not just focusing on Agentforce alone, but looking at how we can utilize Gemini to actually power a lot of these experiences. So the way we kind of approached it, that's exactly what we're going to talk about today. And the first thing we kind of started looking at it, and we realized it relatively soon, is that Agentforce implementation can't be seen just as a technical upgrade, right? It's a lot more than that. And at least kind of from our point of view, we kind of identified that this was a shift in kind of human and agent collaboration, relatively new for everybody. And it is kind of redefining how people and AI sort of operate together. So we wanted to kind of keep that into consideration and figure out, well, how do we move forward? So the three pillars that we are going to talk about today is going to be, how did we got our workforce ready for this sort of agentic upgrade? We'll talk a little bit about strategy and architecture, and then Venki will touch on how did we actually do human adoption? How did we actually get our resolvers and requesters actually kind of adopting what we had built? So I'll start by covering some key lessons initially, and then what we will do is we'll kind of cover some of our tool sets that we have used to sort of promote these lessons. So first of all, I know it's kind of an agentic revolution. Everybody's kind of very excited about building agents. But this is a very good lesson that we learned early, is that we have to put people first. Don't start by just building an agent for the sake of building an agent, right? We need to figure out, right, are people ready for it? And, and how we can get them ready. Personally, we kind of got them ready by discussing broad ideas with them, talking to them about where they were having problems, and really having this mindset of no idea is bad idea. And I think this is really kind of taking shape more so now than ever, because of just there's so much that's possible. The other thing we focused on is well, we're building this with a large group of users and our developers, admins, everybody else, right? How do we upskill them? This is new for everybody, right? So Traditionally, maybe like doing tutorials and things like that would have sufficed, but this time what we learned is like hands-on experimentation and getting users to actually do hands-on sort of building, testing, that really helped. And then one of the things we also focused on early was, because this was new, we wanted to actually look at, well, what are the ideas out there? We couldn't think of all the ideas. So we invited a lot of our user group and started doing hackathons and POCs to actually look at what are the high impact use cases? What are our users focused on building and enabling them to build these? And the way we did that was kind of providing them sandboxes, right? Access to agents without actually providing them, like production data. So we had to like plan for like, how do we actually kind of let them play in a sandbox or a playground without, either leaking sensitive data or, breaking something in production. So how did we turn these ideas into opportunities? The first thing we generally do is we explore the data and look for the opportunities. We define the use cases after that, and we'll get a little bit more sort of like, we'll zoom into this. And we illustrate like solutions, like whether they're working or not, and keeping it high level, right? And this is something that we started quite early. So this is like before actually building a productionized solution, right? So one thing that we focused on was like kind of with our business process owner understanding like, building that shared knowledge base. A lot of time, there are problems that they're encountering, not documented anywhere, nowhere to be found, is just in people's mind, right? So really sitting down with them and understanding what their challenges are, right? And then from that broad set of challenges, defining like exactly what to focus on, right? Define the context. And then very quickly sketch, like a narrow set of possibilities that you want to actually address, right? Decide with your user group, like, how do you want to, what's the best direction that you can take? Prototype with them, right? And then finally, as you prototype, make sure to validate the results with them and gather feedback and sort of like incorporate that into those early prototypes. So that was just one methodology that we used, From an strategy and architecture perspective, what we found out is that users generally will, or like developers, they would jump into sort of like, building agents, but identifying like what you are building, why you are building is equally as important as just like, building. Building for the sake of building is, generally kind of run into problems. So focusing on what problems are being solved, targeting, areas of friction, what areas of friction those are they like high impact area? Is it things like process automation? So the way you approach these use cases can differ. The other thing that we, from an architecture perspective, is like focusing on data integrations early, because what we found was, for a lot of companies, Salesforce is not the only source of data, right? They work with other finance systems, organizational data, things like that. So especially for agents, having access to data really makes a big difference and sort of, figures out whether your project's going to be successful or not. So the trust layer, and it's not only the trust layer from Agentforce perspective trust layer, it's really the trust layer that you need to build in your architecture. And navigating security and compliance, especially for Google, is a very, very important topic. To see like, well, what are the quality and like privacy standards? Don't, take something very late to your security and privacy. Work with them early, identify, what are their requirements. We'll talk a little bit about like the pilot framework as well, like kind of defining like how do you actually define the exit criteria and KPIs. It's very important to define those early because if you don't, whatever like pilot you're building or proof of concept you're building, it's just going to continue and there's going to be a lot of scope creep. So really kind of like setting those boundaries as to what those exit criteria and KPIs are going to be. And this is really important for Google from a COE perspective. It may not apply to every single customer, but whatever we build, we kind of keep scale in mind, right? So whenever we are building these experiences, we're always thinking like, do we need to build them as reusable components or packages? So we don't have to sort of do this work over and over again, and we can ideally roll it out at scale. So from the strategy perspective, if you zoom in a little bit, the way we approach it is we really start by defining the strategic goal. Like talked a little bit about this earlier, right? Like what is it that we're trying to accomplish? Equally important to map the current state. How are users currently doing the process they are doing? Then you can actually then go jump into identifying like, what AI capabilities you may be able to use to sort of like, maybe help with certain bottlenecks, maybe automate the process fully, etc. But that becomes really, really important. And then finally, you may need to redesign the process for the future. So in this new sort of like agentic era, you cannot take the old process, slap a bunch of AI on it and think it will work. You may actually have to have the tough conversations with your business process owners to like, hey, how can we redesign the process to make this streamlined and set you up for success? All right. Building agents is hard. It's not an easy thing. It's easy to get like a simple agent off the ground, but as you start thinking about like rolling it out, you'll have to think about like, hey, how do I measure the consistency of my results? Is there a human that needs to be in the loop to validate the results initially, right? How do I connect to various sources of data that we talked about? Security and data privacy risks, again, can't stress this enough. Work with your security and privacy teams early. You don't want to go really far into a process and then figure out, well, maybe AI agents can't access that data, right? If you're connecting to multiple APIs, that becomes a challenge. Like how do you orchestrate your agent to be able to sort of move between those multiple APIs and be able to get the data that it needs and be able to do it in a timely manner? The other thing we realized is there are a lot of new frameworks coming out. This is new for everybody, right? So how do you build multi-agent systems? MCP, A2A, like those are all new frameworks and they're evolving by the day. So, how do you think about that? It's another key consideration that you may need to think about. We're just starting on this topic. It's the topic of interoperability. How do agents talk to each other, especially in an enterprise environment? We are exploring this topic quite a bit, but interoperability between agents is becoming very important. And then finally, nobody likes to talk about it, but who's actually paying for all of this, right? So like, are you calling your agent when you really need to call the agent, right? Is it being called for unnecessary reasons, right? For example, we built a case summary and we realized we were showing summary on every single case, but some cases were being auto-closed. Nobody ever looks at them. So things like that. And then obviously working with your users to validate that quality of output. And that becomes a very, very big task as you start rolling this out. How do you measure quality and what quality even means? Well, if you thought building agents hard, moving to production, moving agents to production is even harder. So what I mean by that is you need to start thinking about what your governance model for agents is going to be. Like how do you govern these agents? What can they do, what they can't do? What do you do when results starts to deviate? So, over time you can have drift in the results that you're seeing. So how do you actually measure that drift? If users are complaining that, hey, all of a sudden, like, your agent's not behaving the way it's supposed to, right? Like who addresses that? How do you measure that? And that comes to the next topic, which is like there are these sort of like new process owners that need to be there. So for example, who's looking after agent operations? Who's looking after RAG operations? Who's updating that data, right? And LLM ops. So these are like all new fields that somebody will have to sort of like kind of take ownership of. Security, authentication, authorization. I have it multiple times because the security design sometimes is different, like how security may behave in production. So what we mean by that is like, if, let's say, an agent is acting on behalf of a user, right? From a security, authentication, authorization perspective, are they working with users and user credentials? Are they working with, like kind of as a, are we like, essentially differentiating between who the users are and what users' agents are doing. So be able to sort of like monitor that becomes important. Observability and tracing is another big topic for us. So like, hey, how do we do session drill down analysis? How do we actually sort of take a look at it, when problems arise? How do we actually sort of like simplify our entangled workflows? So that becomes, again, a very big topic. Again, track, spend, and charge back, right? Like if let's say you give it a pool of money and then you run out of it, who's going to pay for it? Do you need to charge back, like your end, let's say like business units, the users of your Salesforce org? And then finally, skill sets becomes really important. So we talked about like, all these new roles. So how do we actually train our team to be able to, move these agents to production and be able to monitor them and operate them? The way we approached it, we started our journey back in 2023. And we started with very simple use cases. So we looked at use cases that were like, what we call AI inference. So these would be like something simple like case summary. And just like taking a case summary use case and, putting it to production, you get to learn a lot, right? You kind of get to address a lot of the challenges that we were just talking about. But at least it's at a smaller scale, right? And it's not like you're trying to roll out some business critical functionality and like running into some problems. Then we started looking at, retrieval type of use cases, so knowledge-based use cases. So like how do you combine your knowledge in like a RAG data pipeline and then be able to, serve it up using LLMs or Agentforce. And then we moved on to more so like kind of like function calling. So these are things like, can we do next best action, right? Can we look at, like kind of can we call our internal system sometimes and get like some results back? And depending upon that, can we actually address, what the agent may need to do? What we are kind of in the process of rolling out are like service agents. So looking at like now combining, a lot of the tools that we had previously built with reasoning engines, right? So things like you take the agent, you take LLM, you take RAG, you take the tool calls, but then you put them in a reasoning loop and, you get something like a service agent. And where we are headed right now is a multi-agent system. We're still working on this. So these are use cases, where we have to address agent interoperability. So this could be like agents between like multiple 3P applications talking to each other, third-party applications. So, like Salesforce to Workday or, another third-party application. But for Google, it's also important to think about like how are our first-party applications that are building agents, how do they talk to these third-party applications and vice versa? All right. From a pattern's perspective, kind of similar to the slide before, right? When we started like our Agentforce journey, the way we started looking at it was like, let's get the easy ones out. So these are like Salesforce native capabilities, right? So these are where like the data is within Salesforce and like they're probably the easiest to actually roll out in some ways. So, not crossing the data boundary and just like sort of focus on Salesforce native use cases. And then we moved on to like copilots and agents, right? Here maybe like, we may need to escalate to a human. A human may be monitoring like how, like the agent is behaving. But it's like with that reasoning loop, right? Being essentially letting our like end customers interacting with the agents. The other thing that we had to address was content ingestion. So, not everybody uses Salesforce knowledge. Content for a lot of enterprises everywhere, right? So this could be in playbooks. This could be in a content management system. How do you actually build that content ingestion pipeline and bring it into Salesforce so your agents can actually utilize it? We talked a little bit about that, right? First-party services integration. So like actually connecting to our first-party internal Google tools where a lot of the knowledge actually resides, and how do we do it securely, how do we do it with privacy compliance in mind, and how do we serve that up to agents. And this is where we are headed, like I mentioned, agent interoperability. So we are trying to figure out how do agents actually talk to each other and how do they work together. All right, designing for adoption. I'm gonna pass to Venki now. Thanks.
Thank you, Hasan. So designing for adoption. Hasan's focus area is more of building products and solutions. That's his primary focus area. My focus area is taking this to the business. It's the most easiest part, right? So most of my discussions over here today is all about how do we design these applications for better adoption. I'm going to run through our lessons under 3 broad pillars. The first one is having a very good rollout strategy. How do we roll out from a simple vibe check kind of initiate you to a full-fledged MVP rollout to all the targeted user audience, right? That is the phased approach that you can go through to eventually get there to a MVP phase. We'll talk about it. The other one is everyone's dream is fully autonomous agents which can do anything, everything in the world without human intervention, but that's going to be a journey. So you'll start with something that is 100% human reviewed, maybe to start. Then over a period of time, graduate to a fully autonomous agent, if at all it's possible. And then we'll also talk about a bit more in terms of a governance model to handle this, and also how do we bring in a effective feedback loop into the solutions that you build over there so that you can scale and then it is trusted and expanded over a period of time. Let's get into each of those key lessons here. From a wipe check to MVP. So wipe check is something that we internally call it as a fish food. So what we do is we typically work with some key business champions who help us to build these solutions. We will ask them to test the application. The objective of this wipe check is more in terms of does this solution meets the critical user journeys that we identified as part of the original scope? Is it something that is effective in doing it? That's the fundamental part of the wipe check. The next one is ask them to test it out to see whether they can break these LLM applications by variety of utterances, right? So if it is a financial application, are there some utterances that you can use to just bypass some security protocols that you have put in place? Those kind of the checks are something that the power users are pretty good in doing it. So validate for your critical user journeys, validate for your LLM boundaries and capabilities. And whatever feedback that you have, go and incorporate this before you move it to the next phase, which we call it as a dog food. So here we go ahead and expand this to a slightly a wider audience. The objective over here is to bring in various personas to test your applications and validate the applications, right? The reason here is, again, the LLM applications are very linguistic in nature. The way that these personas interact varies differently. So it's very important that you give these applications to a variety of personas to see whether it works, whether it meets their demands and user needs. Most of the times we find in our experiences, we have to fine-tune this application for various personas. What we design for one persona may not work very well for another personas. You find a lot of missing knowledge sources. You find a missing data sources. There are edge cases that you may not handle for different personas. So all those feedbacks are something that you get in as part of the dog food. So take this feedback in, ensure that you incorporate them before you move it to the final phase, which is you are rolling out a minimal viable product to the entire targeted user base, right? One thing as a prerequisite before you do an MVP is to do a thorough performance testing, ensure that what works for a smaller audience is all something that works for a bigger scale. There is no performance issues and stuff like that. Users will very quickly lose interest in your agents or agentic solution. So that's a prerequisite. But then what is more important in MVP phase is once you roll out to the users, everyone is going to come up with FRs, change requests, enhancements, whatnot, right? So it is very important that you ensure that you are very, very careful in terms of what you accept as a change request. Be sure that it brings in the real business value, aligns to the core purpose of your agentic solution, and then selectively pick, choose, implement, and scale your application over a period of time. What we have found is sometimes you accept some fancy use cases and then end up in diluting the quality of responses of the agent, leading to user adoption issues. So it's just very important that you manage this part very carefully as part of your MVP phase. We will get into the progressive autonomy, the dream state of 100% autonomous agent. How do we get there from wherever you are? The first step is more of a shadow phase. So what we do is deploy these agents. Let the agent does the agentic recommendation. It could probably be canceling the invoice, approving the payment, scanning an invoice PDF, whatsoever it is, right? But then let a human agent reviews it manually, expert agent reviews it manually, and be sure that is the agentic recommendation is aligned with an expert's view, and then go and prepare your golden data set. What is the input? What is the context? What is the agentic decision? What is an expert decision? And is it aligned with the agent decision or not? Aim for a 90% accuracy over here for a good agent to be deployed to production. So that's the shadow phase. The next one is the human in the loop, right? Okay, I mean, how do we scale from here? So that's where that you can engage confidence scores and other mechanism to figure out like, okay, if it is like 90% accurate, then go and let the agent execute it. If not, then put this for a human review. So that's how you can slowly move from a 100% review to a guardrail approach. Then you get into the humans on the loop. Agent does most of this action autonomously, but if it finds some edge cases, some novelty triggers, then it goes and pull the agent in and ask the agent to take a look at it and then ask them to manually go ahead and execute whatever is required, right? Here you can also build some performance heat map in a dashboard format where it shows like how agents performs in various subsections or sub areas. And also designed to have some kill switches in place. So if there are some places where it doesn't perform as expected, you should be in a position to turn on and off, depending upon how critical that particular area is. That's a supervisor mode. And the last one is the managed. We are still somewhere between 2 and 3. The managed is a fully autonomous agent, so where it can learn based on the user feedback, understand the logging and downstream system happenings, and then able to correct itself or roll back itself, but still works in a sandbox without any other challenges or issues, right? That's more in terms of a progressive autonomy on where you can start from somewhere with a 100% review to a fully managed autonomous agent. The last one is the governance and AI monitoring and adoption. So there are a few areas that we learned over a period of time. One is what Hassan was saying, right? Not everything has to be AI-driven. Something can be as simple like a web form, a simple self-service action, and automated stuff. So you don't need agentic stuff for everything. So have a mechanism to control what goes to this agentic experience, what doesn't. So by this way, you can scale it over a period of time. Also, we can ensure that the cost is something that you can manage pretty well. Have centralized dashboards to track the adoption, success rates, and business impact. This is what your business is going to ask you. I mean, if you want more investment on these agents, unless and until you have these metrics to share with them, you are not going to get the fund to expand the scope of these agents. So have these dashboards in place. So these are some of those design things that you have in mind right up front when you are designing. Feedback loop, very important. You have to collect the feedback, but you have to do it in a manner that is very user-friendly in a non-intrusive manner. So you know like what this user's reaction to this agentic experience is. That's going to help you to scale the application as well as manage the quality as you scale over a period of time. Logging, very important. So as you expand this application to a wider user base, there are going to be always some specific data issues, user issues, and all those things that come in. Unless and until you're able to turn on, understand what the user is, do a quick fix, roll out the solution, people are going to lose trust. I mean, they are not going to wait too long, and they might probably move on to another agent built by a different team or altogether for a different purpose. So have this kind of mechanisms in place as part of your design. Prompt is a core part of your agentic solution. So this is a collaborative exercise where tech is involved, business is involved, support teams are involved. So have a collaborative way to manage and maintain your prompts so that you can build it iteratively over a period of time and expand the use cases as you move forward. The last one is more in terms of performance monitoring. As you scale and expand the agents, it's important that the application performance is up to the mark. It doesn't degrade. So have something in place to measure and track the application performance and solve doing good, right? And this is all more in terms of what we kind of have to take care as part of your governance and monitoring mechanism. So these are some of our learnings from agentic, taking the agents to the end users and what and all the design elements that you have to consider in mind when building your agents. That's pretty much our learnings so far.
Just want to remind everybody that like feedback is a gift. So if you have any feedback, please provide it to us, and hopefully we can iterate on this presentation. We're still in the process of like building agents, deploying agents, training our users. So if you have any questions, we can try to answer them. But let us know what challenges you guys are having, and maybe we can talk to you guys about some of our shared experiences. Thanks, everyone.
Thank you.